Um, okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have the pleasure of having John from Scottish Association of Landlord tonight, who has kindly agreed to come to our meeting, which is the benefit of lockdown is that it doesn't matter. So John is attending one meeting, but then the property investors and landlords are all over Scotland. So we are looking forward to tonight. And for those of you who don't know John, probably you don't have a rental property in Scotland. So John has been in the private rental sector for 25 years and is one of the leaders in the private rental sector. So he is the chief executive of Scottish Association of Landlord, which we personally use a lot for running our business, and they are great help to us. He also acts on Scottish government on behalf of SAL, and they lobby a lot and fighting landlords' corner, which John is talking about what they have done during the COVID-19 crisis for landlords tonight. Also, John is a chairman of Landlord Accreditation Scotland, and he's also a member of First Tier Tribunal, and also he's a member of Chartered Institute of Housing Association. So welcome, John.
Thank you.
Tonight, the format is going to be question and answer. So we encourage all of the people who are live, please pop your question into the chat box, and between me and Kesser, we try to cover them. We have a set of questions that we thought it is a general question and will benefit the majority of the audience. So we are going to ask those first, but please feel free to pop your questions in the chat box and we'll try our very best to answer those as well. So over to you, Kesser, to start the question. Sorry, John, if you want to introduce yourself and say hello to people before we start the questions. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, me. I was wondering who you were talking to. Yeah, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for joining us tonight. Basically, you've done a great introduction there, talking about largely my role in the private rented sector. So I think the main thing I want to get across is if you're not a member of the Scottish Association of Landlord, you should be joining. So I hope that you will, if you're not a member, you'll seriously consider that after this evening's session. And certainly, as has been mentioned, a big part of our work is lobbying and campaigning on behalf of landlords, as well as giving day-to-day support. So it's important to know we are landlords ourselves who are running the organisation, so as directors and some as staff too. So we're landlords working for other landlords and letting agents as well. And the Scottish Association of Landlords is the largest landlord and letting agent organisation operating in Scotland. And we do have tie-ups with, it's now a new organisation, the National Residential Landlords Association in England. They cover England and Wales and Northern Ireland, and of course we cover Scotland. So so there's a UK network that we link into as well too. So in these days of everything that's happening with legislation, that's really important. So certainly happy to take questions about what SAL does, how SAL can help you in your business, because I think it's essential, and hopefully from some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight, you realise it's a must for you as a landlord. So there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I'll just quickly introduce myself as well. My name is Kesser Salimi. I'm going to be co-hosting it today with Ella. I just want to kind of echo what Ella said as well. Thanks, John, for coming on today. So I'll kick off the questions to, so obviously it's kind of unprecedented times for us as landlords, but also to our tenants as well. How can we potentially help our tenants that are, finding it difficult to pay their rent just now? Do you have any tips, Sal, for that?
Yeah, as you say, it's a very, very difficult time. It's a difficult time for everybody. And when things really kicked off at the end of March, we were very conscious that we as an organisation needed to get to grips with changes in legislation which we knew were coming along to cope with the COVID crisis. But we wanted to make sure enough support was in place for members as well as for their tenants too, because everybody's panicking. And back at the end of the March, you'll probably remember this, is that landlords didn't know if they were going to get another penny in rent, which is essential for us as landlords, let's face it. And of course, tenants were panicking because they didn't know if they were still going to have a job and who was going to be paying their salary. And that was before we knew about furloughing and the different schemes of assistance that are now available to tenants. So what we have actually done for members is there is a sheet which details all the ways that tenants can get help financially to be able to pay their rent. So literally from within the first couple of days of the lockdown, we were issuing that to members and say, if you get a tenant who can't pay, is struggling, or doesn't understand where to go for help, give them this. And I think that's been a huge benefit to many tenants because, you know, especially in the early days, nobody knew who to go to. And governments were announcing initiatives, but of course there was nothing online that you could really go to. And that took a few days before all of that came into being. So we do have that sheet that's still in use today, and that certainly would be a benefit to you as members. So it just tells the tenants where they can go and the different help that's available to help them pay rent, which is important.
Yeah, no, it's a great sheet. I've used it myself for my tenants. So, I mean, and can we potentially use that? You know, how would you kind of suggest us being proactive towards helping our tenants in the current situation? Would it be contacting them?
Yeah, I think, well, it's up to you, and I can't tell you how to run your business because we would all do it in a different way. Certainly, many tenants are still able to pay the rent and there's no issues. So I think it's wrong for us to assume that everybody has a problem and has an issue. So, and as landlords, we manage that day in, day out. Actually, managing rent arrears is something we do. We're pretty good at it normally. So what do you do then? Well, you wait for that tenant to contact you. And at that point, you would maybe say, right, okay, let's work together to try and find a solution. And so the first thing is, yes, do you know where you can go for help? So that's where that sheet comes in handy. But it's also about saying, I understand your situation. And tenants are genuinely anxious about losing their home. And if you've got a tenant and a good tenant looking after the property, you want to keep them too. So it's a case of saying, can we work out a repayment plan? Or if you have to apply for benefits, that's going to take time before that money comes in. So, you know, it's reassuring them that you're going to work with them to help support them and get access to ways to find the money that they need. And if that means giving rent reductions, many landlords have done that, even from day one. They just contacted their tenants saying, I know your situation, and you know what, I'm taking 10, 20, 30% off the rent. These are the stories we've been hearing to help them along the way. And that's been really reassuring for the tenants. Or if it's not a rent reduction, maybe you say, do you know what, let's work out a repayment plan. And it could be over months to help them cope with the situation. So it's whatever suits you and your tenant. The main thing is you talk, you enter into the conversation, and you encourage them to communicate with you and saying, listen, please don't hide from it. Let's see what we can work out between us. And there's great stories out there, which I'm reassured to hear, where landlords have worked out good solutions with their tenants. So that's good.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And yeah, you're right. A lot of tenants obviously don't want to lose their home, and at the same time, some don't know what they can apply for as well. So using that sheet can be quite helpful for tenants in particular. Okay, that's good.
And for some people, it's not easy to understand all these things, or even you can say, well, you know, you can get this, but how do they apply? How does it work? How does the system work? And certainly through our advice line, even if you don't know as a landlord, you can come to us and we can give you some guidance and say, actually, in reality, this is how long it will take, or the sort of tenants who will be able to get help from these different schemes. And we're learning as we go along about that too. But that's experience we can share with you, and that's the benefit of being part of SAL.
Yeah, that's good. And obviously we don't want to kind of get to that situation, but let's say if the tenant is struggling to pay their rent and you have to kind of, obviously we've heard now that the eviction process has been extended from 3 to 6 months. So what does that exactly mean for us as landlords, and what grounds can you evict somebody on now?
Well, we've had one coronavirus bill, which is now an act, which was nearly a couple of months ago now. Today was stage 3 of the second coronavirus bill. So we've had 2 major bits of emergency legislation to help support tenants and others in society. It's not just about tenancy law. But the key messages that are coming across here for these from the politicians is that they don't want tenants to be evicted, and they want to be clear that landlords should not be putting people out of their tenancies at this difficult time. So one thing that we're saying is, do you know what we're going to say? If you're giving notice to tenants to leave, and we've got grounds to do that, then instead of it being just 20 days or the 3 months, it's now going to be 6 months notice that we need to give. In most cases, some of the grounds it's 3 months, and if a tenant just abandons a tenancy, they're no longer using it, that remains at 20 days. So, but the main things for us is if they don't pay rent, what we're looking at there, well, we're looking at 6 months, that's what we're looking at. And even today, there was a lot of discussion around that in Parliament, where politicians were making it clear people should not be losing their homes because they can't pay rent, and they will do whatever they need to do in legislation to prevent that from happening. Now, for us as landlords, that's not good news, but you can understand that the politicians are trying to protect people and keep them in their homes, and that's what they see as their job. So we as landlords have to try and work around that and make that. And in most cases, tenants do pay. They'll work out a payment plan with you, and you don't need to worry about these eviction grounds. But I'm afraid it has been extended, and it could be extended still. We're in the coronavirus emergency period until the end of September, when all these regulations apply. But there is provision within that act for it to be extended for another 6 months, and then another 6 months, because of course we don't know how long this crisis is going to last. So as long as the crisis lasts, the easy thing to say is it's going to be difficult for us to take action to evict any tenants during this period, because the government and all political parties don't want us to be doing that at this very crucial time.
John, not paying rent is something that understandable, and people can empathize with that. So people are in financial difficulty. But what surprised me when I saw the legislation is that if a tenant do a criminal offense there, you still cannot evict them. So I was very surprised to see that.
Yeah, eviction's eviction, regardless of the ground, I guess, and that's how the politicians were looking at it. And antisocial behaviour is a concern. You don't have to wait the 6 months, that could be 3 months. It's still extended from what was the 28 days. So these are concerns for us as landlords, definitely. And it was mentioned at that debate during the debating of the first coronavirus bill. Some politicians did express concern about that, especially in a period of lockdown, do we want to have people engaging in antisocial behaviour within our common stairs or through the walls from us? That's terrible for any of us, whether we're tenants or owner-occupiers, to cope with. But again, the overarching principle is people shouldn't be putting it out of their homes at this particular time. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. So in that case, then, is the first-tier tribunal still operating at the moment?
Well, the first-tier tribunal, and as mentioned earlier, I happen to be one of the members of the tribunal. So I do have an interest in the tribunal and I have an understanding of how it works and how it operates. Given the crisis, and obviously the tribunal had to make a decision about whether it could continue its normal function or not, and a decision was made that couldn't happen. And I'm sure you could probably understand that hearings would not be possible in this time. There's also about staff safety as well as landlords and tenants in coming together for hearings. So a decision was made that basically there wouldn't be any tribunals sitting until the end of May, and we're coming up to that period now. So what happens beyond that, I still don't know. I know that they're trying to work to see if they can get staff back into the offices. And of course, we all know that's going to be difficult with social distancing. And that would only be when, of course, the Scottish Government relaxes the lockdown. So we still don't know when that's going to happen either. So it's very much, there is nothing happening at the moment. So as far as hearings go. So that will resume. Of course, then, of course, the question comes that, does that mean there'll be a backlog? And yes, undoubtedly there will. But I'm sure the tribunal will be thinking about ways as to how it could cope with that going forward. So, and I think in these difficult times, everybody's trying to embrace new technology and thinking, could things be done virtually rather than round a table? You know, I'm sure all of these things, I don't know, but I'm sure all of these things have been taken into consideration. This is part of a wider, I guess, scoping process that the whole Scottish courts and tribunal service has been looking at. So it affects the whole of the judiciary, not just the first tier tribunal and the housing tribunal. So it's going to be wide ranging, but they're on to it, shall we say. That's as much as we know at the moment. And we will be hearing more soon, and literally over the next couple of weeks. And once the government gives us more of an idea as to what they want to be doing post-lockdown, then that will help us all understand how these systems will operate in the future.
Okay, thank you, John. And I've seen there's been some changes to the PRT as well. What changes were made recently?
Yeah, again, if you're a member of SAL, and you'll know this, that we actually have, there's a standard document on there which gives you a copy of the PRT and highlights the changes. A lot of it was actually just about updating the PRT, to be honest. You're going to see a cat come into the shot shortly. She's going to try and jump through this one. There you go. Perfect there. So I'm going to have to open the door. Give me a second, sorry. She would come back through there, so there we go. So a couple of the changes, it was more tidying up. As you'll be aware, there was changes to smoke alarm legislation that hadn't been updated in the PRT. So changes to tenancy deposits legislation too, again, that hadn't been updated, as well as, of course, the grounds and the notice periods for the grounds. So yes, there was a lot of tidying up there was taking place. It's nothing dramatic. But the best advice to any landlord is when you go to create a new private residential tenancy, what you do is you go to the online model, and that is the up-to-date version. And you just use that every time, rather than downloading a Word version and keeping using that as you stick it on your desktop, because very soon it could well be out of date. So you're getting another cat now. So
I know.
There are only two. So
Okay, that's great, John. Thank you. And how about flipping on the other side? So obviously, you know, it's been extended notice periods for us now, potentially 6 months, or could be even longer. But for the tenant to give notice, they only have to give 28 days. Has there been any thoughts on extending the notice period for tenants?
No, and certainly the politicians wouldn't be considering that. It's a case of they would still only be able to give 28 days. And actually that has been, you know, in fairness to some tenants, if they are going to be struggling to pay their rent, they might take a very reasonable decision to say, well, do you know what, I'm going to move to something a bit cheaper, or move in with my parents, or whatever. Whatever they feel is appropriate for them given their financial circumstances. So actually you would be wanting to work with them to do that. There's no point in people getting into rent arrears if they can't afford the property that they're living in. So I don't necessarily see that as a major issue. I think the biggest issue we're coming across at the moment is not rent arrears, it's the fact you've got void properties. So you've got no income at all and no tenant to pay it. And the Scottish Government guidance has been, during lockdown, you don't move new tenants into the property. Now, it's not illegal to do so, because sometimes you might have people who need a home because they've got nowhere to live, or they're overcrowded in the circumstances that they're in the home that they've got at the moment. So you can do it observing social distancing procedures, but many landlords and letting agents are saying, I've got lots of properties here just waiting to go in the market, and they're sitting empty. And that's what's costing, rather than rent arrears. So that's where we are at the moment.
Absolutely.
And not hearing the horror stories about rent arrears at the moment, although there are some, don't get me wrong, but I suspect there might be more in the future, because a lot of people, as you know, have been furloughed. So they're still getting 80% of their income.
Yeah.
But it could well be that beyond furloughing, some of these people could be made redundant. And that's when we could see problems. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
The other thing about the grounds, when it would go to the tribunal at the end, then all the grounds are discretionary. So it's really up to the tribunal to decide whether it would be reasonable for you to be granted eviction. So that's, whereas before some of the grounds were mandatory and some were discretionary, they're all discretionary now during this emergency period.
Okay, so I think key thing is obviously working with your tenants as well. You don't want to be getting into that situation.
It is, and that's what I'm saying to everybody at the moment. And yes, you can issue your notice. Yes, it's going to be 6 months, but the issue is, if you've got a tenant who has been a good payer for some time, you've got a good relationship with them, and they've fallen in hard times, it's a difficult time for many people, then it's best to work with them and find a solution, rather than thinking, okay, I'm going to have to evict them. We wouldn't normally jump to that stage. So no. Maybe we need to be a bit more proactive in working with them. And for those who have done that, that's been very successful so far. So hopefully
absolutely,
that will continue to be the case.
Thank you, John. Okay, Ella, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, so I very much agree with you. So the guideline that you have issued beginning of the lockdown has been very helpful to us, because we use that and start communicating with our tenant, and we were not very sure whether we should take a proactive approach or we should just leave it until they come back to us. But because we used that, and probably I would say we took the risk, but the communication is now open, so it's very manageable. So we know where they are. So rather than asking for any rent reduction, what we had was more about, can we pay a week later? Can we pay 2 days later? And because of that, we know what is happening, and they are not stressed as well.
Exactly. And that's great. That's exactly the stories we've been hearing and what we hoped would be the case. So yes, it could be, some people did say they proactively just contacted everybody and saying, if you're going to have a problem, let us know, and this is where you can go for help. And they actually got a good result back from tenants saying, thanks for thinking of us, and this is really useful, because I'm worried about my job and my prospects to be able to pay. Can maybe pay this month, but it's next month they're worried about. And you want to get them thinking about that now and not hiding their head in the sand until you're chasing them for rent. Yeah. So being proactive in that way for many has really worked. So
we also have seen through your newsletter that you had lobbied a loan for landlords. Can you please explain about that? So who is entitled to, what are the conditions that people can apply for? And is there any other support out there for the people who are not entitled to? If you can explore a little bit that.
Well, again, away at the beginning, within the first couple of days, and if you can understand, I've obviously had a lot of contact with politicians and the civil servants in the Scottish Government on a daily basis. So in the first couple of days, I was saying, we need to help landlords here. You're going to have to provide something, because we started to hear about the small business grants that were available for those who had offices. And I can understand if they're suddenly to close, then that's an issue. How are they going to get an income to keep the business going? I'm saying, landlords are running businesses too, and for many of us, this is our main or sole source of income. But actually, where do we go for help? So the government in Scotland took that on board because I was saying the majority of landlords in Scotland have 5 properties or less. That's 95% of landlords in Scotland have 5 or less properties, under 5 properties. So, which is really interesting. So that's the majority of the sector. And some of those people, maybe with just 1 or 2, if some of you just have 1 or 2 buy-to-lets, then actually that's the typical landlord in the whole UK, as well as here in Scotland. But actually, that might be your main income. It might be topping up a pension for some people. And if you don't get that income, then you're worried about paying your mortgage, or where's the money going to come in for you to live on? And there was no support there. So we started to hear a lot about loans that were available to businesses, and thought, well, something should be available to private landlords too. So they did step up to the mark and they provided this loan. Now, the loan is available for landlords who have 5 or less properties. That's what it is. So if you've got more properties, it's not that they won't be interested in you. They're interested in hearing your story because they might actually, and they might, there's no guarantee, but they might look at extending that loan to help more landlords, depending on the uptake. Nobody knew how many people were going to be applying, and it's only just opened. So it's certainly there for people to investigate. So the first criteria is really looking at 5 or less properties within your portfolio, and you would be able to apply to get 100% of the rent lost for one of those properties. So say you had 1 tenant within that 5, if you've got 5, who's affected through the coronavirus epidemic, that haven't been able to afford to pay the rent, then you would be able to get 100%, a loan to the equivalent of 100% of their rent for one property. But the government is saying if it's affecting more than one property, so say you've got 3 or 4 that are affected, then they will look at your application. So there's no guarantees, but they're saying, please let us know. And I believe they are asking, is it affecting more than one property? So it is a loan though. So, you have to pay it back. It's interest free. So you're not paying interest on it. And you'll have to start paying it back at the end of the coronavirus emergency period, which is, as we've been talking about, 6 months. But if that got extended, then so too would the loan. And it's interest free for as long as you've got the loan. So for those landlords in dire straits, then a loan is better than nothing. It might be keeping them in business. What the government's saying is you should also be applying for a mortgage holiday as well too. Some people don't have mortgages, so it wouldn't apply to them. So you could still get a loan even if you don't have a mortgage. So,
but does it matter whether the people own this property in, so let's say there's a landlord less than 5 properties, but it's owning the limited company. Does it matter?
It would, as far as this loan is concerned, because this loan is only available to individual landlords. So a landlord who owns the property in their own name. So if it was under an umbrella of a company, then technically that's a business, and therefore the loan wouldn't be available to them. However, what you should be able to apply for is the bounce back scheme for businesses.
Okay. It's interesting that you touched on that, because that was my second question, because there has been a lot of debate between different people that whether a property investor whose main income is coming from rental properties can apply for a bounce back loan or not.
Yeah, and I think there's a yes and no answer to that. We'll have to wait and see the result of whether people are getting it once they actually apply. My understanding, if they're a limited company, as you were explaining, they're a business, so therefore they should be able to get it regardless of how many properties they've got. And that's why the government limited the loan in Scotland, because they felt that there should be other ways of getting a loan if you're a business. You don't need this particular loan. So if you're a limited company, then that should be okay. The other thing is if you've got a business bank account. So it could well be that some people, say, maybe have 10 properties, 20 properties, but they're not a limited company. It's in their own names, but they operate through a business banking system. They've got a business bank account. Then it could well be, and my understanding is, they could get the bounce back scheme. Because one of the criteria is you're operating through business banking. Because the loan comes from the bank. So that's, you would go to your own business bank and get the help. So my understanding from speaking to my colleagues in England is that that's how it should operate. So whichever landlord category you fall into, there should be a loan available for you. You know, if you're a business or an individual. The issue is if you're an individual with 6, 7, 8 properties, which a lot of people fall into that category, they might not get anything at the moment. But as I say, we're hoping and we're saying that this loan should be a first step to helping landlords. So we're hoping it could be extended. And the good news is the government's saying, let me know if you've got more properties and affected, and they'll take it into consideration.
So who should they contact if they are not fitting in the category that has been advertised at the moment?
Well, there is a generic, and certainly for members of SAL, this is going to be coming out shortly, actually. We have there's a generic email address that we can provide. So we're certainly happy to share that with you if you want to get that out to the network. But certainly members of SAL will be provided with that. And it's saying note your interest if this would be of interest to you and you have more than 5 properties. So the door's not closed, but at the moment that loan isn't available. And it is a loan, it's not a grant. But I have to say the government has come under a great deal of criticism for offering loans to landlords. And this is only available for landlords operating in Scotland. Remember, landlords operating in England can't even get this loan. The UK government hasn't provided any facility. It's only the Scottish government that's done this. So I've been following on Twitter and other social media, and lots of people are saying this is unfair that landlords are actually getting loans, even though they have to pay it back. So it just shows you the kind of feeling out there in wider society about helping landlords. And that's difficult for politicians to do. So I think we have to be grateful for getting that support, as little as it is so far.
Okay, excellent. So is there any help for letting agents? Because there was a lot of, there is help out there for hospitality, but letting agent that they have office premises, do they have access to any grants?
Well, yes. So again, what we've been working on, lots of letting agents have offices that would fall into the grant for small businesses. So for instance, if you don't pay rates on the property, so you qualify under the small business a bonus scheme, then you would get the 10,000. You'd be able to apply for the 10,000 grant. So the issue has been is if you've got a bigger office where you don't qualify for the bonus scheme, so your rateable value is over 18,000, then effectively that's when you would need to be applying under the retail, hospitality or leisure grant, which is for £25,000. Now, the issue has been until literally the last week that letting agents weren't able to apply for that because they weren't seen as retail. Now, we've lobbied the government to change that, saying, of course, they're retail because they're selling services. That's what they do, sell services to landlords. So they should be classed as retail. And I'm pleased to say that last week the government changed guidance to allow letting agents to be. It's still at the discretion of local authorities, so it's up to local authority whether you get it or not. But I'm now hearing letting agents, because of the lobbying work that we've done, they're now getting the 25,000. So if you've got office premises as a letting agent, then, or even as a landlord, to be honest, if you've got office premises, you should qualify either for the 10,000 or for the 25,000.
Okay, excellent news. So over to you, Kessler.
Yeah, thanks, Ella. John, has there been any update on the registrars of Scotland? Obviously, right at the beginning, they weren't set up for handling paper, and we had the issues there. And then they brought out an interim solution. Is there any sort of progress towards a more sort of concrete solution for them? Because we've seen, obviously, that interim solution is helping property investors buy properties just now, but in particular, limited company landlords who are purchasing properties, some lenders in particular are not allowing the transactions to happen because they're worried about other charges going on the properties for the delays that take for these to get registered as well. So is there any update on that?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert in sales because that's obviously not what we advise on as SAL, but happened to be, I was part of a meeting this morning with the Scottish Government looking about reopening the housing market, and people representing that sector, the house selling and buying sector, are obviously keen to get things moving again. So Registers of Scotland were part of that meeting. And basically they were saying that they're geared up, ready to go, because of course everybody's thinking they're going to get inundated when they open their doors again. But they say they're getting ready and they're prepared for that. So as soon as the government is able to say that they can operate again, then they're saying they'll be ready to be able to do that. So hopefully we're not far from that.
Okay, sounds
but
good.
I'm sure they'll be talking themselves about releasing information and what they'll be telling the wider public. So, but they're certainly aware that, of course, they want to be up and running as soon as they can, and they've been planning that for a little while now.
Okay, that sounds promising. Thank you. Okay, Ella, back to you.
Thank you. So before we move from Register of Scotland, there's a lot of rumor going around that there may be a reduction in stamp duty. Do you think that will happen?
I'm not optimistic about that, but as I say, it's not something I've been privy to, but I don't think that would be a popular political move. But I don't know, and I'm hoping that would be the case, but I've not heard anything more about that.
Okay. So the next set of questions that we have is regarding certification. So obviously there's a lot of tenants who are self-isolating. So I know for a fact that SAL has issued a lot of, again, guidelines for that. Can you explain a little bit to the people that what is the latest update for certification like EPC, EICR, and gas certificate?
Yeah. Well, the Scottish Government at the beginning was very clear that we shouldn't be carrying out unnecessary works in our properties. So that's general maintenance. Emergencies, yes, we need to do, if you can get the tradesmen to do it. In a way, at the beginning, it was even a struggle to get tradesmen to do emergency repairs. But then within a few days, they started to do it. And I think everybody started to take a common sense approach to things. And now they're doing general repairs if you want them to do it. So the government's still clear that during the lockdown period, we shouldn't be carrying out on these unnecessary works. However, when it comes to safety, then the issue is with gas safety, for instance, then that's a reserve matter for the UK government. And the Health and Safety Executive have been very clear all the way along that they've been saying, you're still required to carry out these checks. So there's been no change to that law to say that you don't need to do them, despite what the Scottish Government has been advising. So what the compromise that has been drawn from that, because the UK government, HSE, is still resolute in the advice that they were giving, likewise with the Scottish Government, is HSE said, but if you can't get in because the tenant doesn't want you going in, or as you say, they're self-isolating, then what you would need to do is record that you've tried to get into the property. And then, of course, make repeated attempts to try and get in. And emphasize to the tenant, this is for their safety. It's a legal requirement. It has to be done. And actually, the tradespeople who are qualified to carry out these safety checks know what appropriate steps and measures that they should be taking regards to PPE and how they could operate and do these checks safely within a home. So certainly they still need to be done. As far as the Scottish Government's concerned, when it comes to electrical safety checks, they are saying they don't need to be required at the moment to be carried out. So they are really saying that's not an essential job that needs to be done at the moment. But we expect these things will change literally on a week-by-week basis now. So, and even now, certainly I'm hearing tenants they're not as anxious as they were 2 months ago. So they're starting to get used to it a bit more. And they're realizing that tradesmen are professional. They're getting advice from their own trade bodies as to how they can operate safely within somebody else's home. And they have to think of their own safety as well as the tenant's safety too. So I think these are things maybe we're all going to get more used to in the coming weeks and months as time goes on. So it's a new way of life for us all, I think, in dealing with how we can be safe in carrying out our day-to-day tasks.
Certainly. So we also have seen regarding the EPC, minimum EPC regulation, that now that has been paused. So what does that mean for property investors, and when do you think it will come back again?
It will come back again. It's certainly not been lost. I think the whole of the government's been focused on coronavirus for obvious reasons, and all the legislation and the measures around that. So when it comes to energy efficiency, there's really a pause in that legislation at the moment. So it's not, and actually, you know, they were bringing that in the 1st of April. That's now been extended to the 1st of October. But, you know, it's still sitting at the 1st of October at the moment. And what they need to do prior to that is bring out guidance for us all. So we need to know what to do. And we've not got that. So we are pausing as well. But, you know, that 1st of October is still looming. But in the meantime, they've been very clear in saying we're not really focusing on that. So does that mean it'll be extended beyond October? We don't know. It's the simple answer to that at the moment. So we still need to be working towards that. But I guess that's really not a priority for anybody at the moment. So legislation still exists. And there's the political will for that to come in. It's just a case of when, not if.
Okay. So back to you, Kessler.
Thanks, Ella. So John, just as landlords, you know, apart from the certificates, what constitutes as necessary work, and can we potentially do renovations on an empty property?
Well, I think there's a difference with an empty property. Basically, the Scottish Government's very clear just now, and line is, we shouldn't be carrying out these works at the moment. So people shouldn't be doing these jobs, basically. That's where we are. Now, that is going to change literally over, I know the First Minister is going to be speaking tomorrow and maybe giving some indication as to what will happen beyond the end of the month. But it's going to be a slow process. So who will be allowed to return to work? So there's an issue, first of all, about who can actually go into the properties to do the work. Do we have the tradespeople to be able to do that? I think that will be a challenge. Yeah. So certainly if it's lying empty, then there's less of a risk because you've not got a tenant to consider. And there's less of a risk to the tradespeople because it's an empty property. But at the moment, you know, it's not illegal to be doing these things, but the guidance says that we shouldn't be working. We should be staying at home. Have you heard that one before? So that's very much the message in the Scottish Government. It's very clear. We should be staying at home and sticking to that.
Okay. So as good landlords, obviously, if we're staying at home, you know, some of us have obviously got properties that have been empty since right at the beginning of the lockdown. Is there going to be any exemptions on council tax for us?
Well, today there was a debate, as I mentioned earlier, stage 3 debate on the new coronavirus act, as it will be shortly when it receives royal assent, as coronavirus bill number 2. So some of the things in there which were pretty worrying, and this was yesterday and today that these were debated. For instance, to give you an idea, it was going to be that potentially we wouldn't be able to evict a tenant at all if they were in rent arrears during this period. Another one was that we wouldn't be able to raise rents for 2 years. There would be a rent freeze imposed in all private tenancies. In fact, all tenancies. And today it was reduced to just private tenancies. So that was an issue. And then, of course, if a tenant actually got into severe financial hardship, they couldn't pay the rent, the rent arrears would be extinguished, was what was in one of the amendments. So these are far-reaching issues for us as landlords, and let me tell you, very concerning for me, trying to lobby against them. I'm pleased to say that these things were voted down in Parliament today, so we don't need to worry about them, but they were voted down yesterday too, but they came back before the whole Parliament this afternoon in the main chamber. So we don't have that. But what we have been lobbying for is council tax exemptions. So what we've managed to get, there were two things. An issue here is many landlords are let to students. And of course, very early on, all the students gave notice. The left, it just gave the 28 days when the universities closed. And we don't know when they're going to be reopening. So that's another issue. So landlords are sitting with empty properties, these big HMOs, and saying, when am I ever going to get another tenant? And they're geared for students. That's the market that they're operated in. So we really said that for the period that they're lying empty, there should be a council tax exemption for that whole period. There is at the moment for 4 months. If they were previously let to students and you had students moving into it, there was a 4-month period where it would be free anyway. But you don't know who's going to be moving in the future, and you don't know when that's going to happen. So there has to be an exemption there on paying council tax. So that was approved by Parliament today. So that helps those landlords who are letting to students. The other amendment that was being put forward was to help every landlord, in the sense of if you've got a void property, you shouldn't be paying council tax on it. Unfortunately, that wasn't successful in Parliament. So it didn't get to the point of being voted on, but it was very clear that it wouldn't be passed by Parliament. So, but we did get those amendments put forward, but only one's been successful.
Okay, fair enough. Well, yes, I suppose when you're hearing about some of the bills that were proposed, it's good that we've got people like yourself that are kind of lobbying against some of these extreme sort of...
well, that's our job as SAL, and it's a very difficult job because you're dealing with politicians who have their own agendas and their own party agendas too. And when it comes to winning votes, it's tenants who win the votes, not landlords. Is anybody really going to be worried about a landlord being out of pocket at the end of the month because they've not got rent? Don't think so. That's the reality of life. And that's you and I that's affected by that. So every little win that we get, but it certainly was concerning me that if suddenly tenants didn't have to pay rent, would have rent arrears written off, and there would be a criteria that we need to go through to get them written off. But if that was a possibility, then many tenants would just choose to not pay rent, and that would be a disaster for us all. So thankfully, these things are not a concern for us at the moment. But they will come back in legislation, and I think that's clear from the discussions today that politicians are very keen to make sure that there's more rights for tenants than what they have at the moment. So.
Okay, interesting times. There's been some good news as well recently with the local housing allowance rates. They've been increased for a lot of regions. Are you able to explain a bit about that and why that's come about recently as well?
Yeah, it's almost it's by coincidence really. It's happened within the last month, but in 2015 there was a freeze imposed on any increase on benefits as part of the austerity measures that were introduced by the UK government. So remember, this is a reserved issue to the UK government. So that 5-year period happened to be up in the beginning of April 2020. So that now means that how they calculate local housing allowance is based on the 30th percentile of rents, market rents. Now, it was frozen at the 30th percentile back in 2015. So now it's suddenly hiked up, but that's it just catching up now, effectively, with the market. So certainly landlords will have seen and tenants will have seen a big increase. In some cases, in fairness, it's not everywhere. I know some landlords have been saying, actually, the LHA has increased quite a bit in my area, and that's simply because now it's catching up with the 30th percentile. So that was planned to come in at the beginning of April. The other thing to bear in mind is that as part of the mitigation for the coronavirus, the UK government did increase universal credit to tenants as well too. So they will see an increase in their payments. I reckon that's £20 that they will see an increase of that as well too. So so benefits have increased there. So tenants, if they're in receipt of benefits, should be able to afford the rent more than they have been able to do for the last few years.
Okay, good. So yeah, on that same topic then, obviously there's potentially going to be more tenants now that are going to be receiving benefits than there was before. How can we communicate best with DWP? Because in the past, myself and other landlords, when we call the DWP up, they kind of say, due to GDPR, we can't talk about either your tenant or, your situation. Is there any way around that at all?
Yeah, well, again, over the last year, we've worked quite closely with the DWP to get more help for landlords, to say that, if you're even trying to help your tenant to find out how they apply or the state of their application, what stage is it at, the landlord has no way of finding out that information. So the DWP, as you know, it's all controlled by call centres now, whereas before it was the local authorities were involved in that process. And some landlords over the years have built up good relationships with the local authority through housing benefit. So if they had a problem, they would phone the council and they'd be able to, within limits, get help and support for their tenant. Whereas that's not been happening with the DWP under the new universal credit. So we've been saying, we're going to have a bit more joined up thinking about this and help landlords to be able to support their tenants, essentially. So what we have come up with is, and you'll see it as a member of SAL, there's a whole information there on local housing allowance and universal credit as part of the suite of information sheets that we have for landlords. And there's a little diagram, and it's a graphic actually, and it gives hyperlinks within it at different stages of the process. So it's like a speech bubbles between a landlord and a tenant. So if tenant's experiencing this problem, this is what the landlord can advise. And there's hyperlinks to go through to where they can actually get help and what help is available. And literally we've not quite got the information out to members yet, but it's coming out soon, is that the DWP has now produced a new online portal where if a landlord's got a problem, they could apply for direct payment through that. Whereas before it was through the APA system, if anybody's been familiar with that. So that's been digitized. So hopefully that should be a lot easier now as well too. So we've been lobbying for that for some time, but it just happens to be now that that's come in. So there is information. If you go to Universal Credit, there's information there for landlords and information for tenants. So it will give you that link to that graphic that I'm talking about as well too. But SAL members will have that available to them as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, John. Back to you, Ella.
Thank you very much. So my final question of the series of the questions that we have prepared for you, and then after that we go to the audience question, is that what's your view on Scottish market for housing? So do you think, what is the effect of COVID-19 and do you think will be on that market?
That's a $64,000 question. So I don't have my crystal ball at the moment. And I think my mind changes on it almost daily at the moment. I'm certainly conscious of lots of void properties that's sitting around there, and suddenly they're going to come to the market. So does that mean there's going to be an influx of a lot of properties, which means that lots of landlords will be vying for the same tenants? So will we see a decrease in rent values? That might well happen. And in some areas that could happen. So we could see rents coming down as landlords just try and let the stock. But at the same time, I don't know about you folks, but as a landlord, I've been quite interested as to how many tenants are looking to view properties, or potential tenants are looking to view. So there's inquiries still coming in. Even the lockdown, I reckon it's just because people are bored and they're suddenly realizing, I don't like this flat or this house anymore. Let's go on the internet and okay, maybe we could move. Or people are looking to downsize, or people are looking for something a bit bigger. Because with home working, that's really going to become a thing that most of us have to accept on the longer term. So if you're in a little one-bedroom flat, just now you might be thinking, A, maybe I want a garden, and B, maybe another room so we can have it as an office, if they can afford that. So certainly I'm finding people are wanting to view properties. So that's encouraging. It means people are interested in the concept of moving. So if we can match the same amount of people up with the same amount of properties, it works for everybody. So I don't know. The house sales market, speaking to colleagues there today, some of them are saying, people selling their homes might be more reluctant to do that. So they'll just, it's not as if there'll be a huge amount of properties coming to the market. They might hold on to them a bit, because let's face it, it's your home. Do you want people coming into your home to view? And the way we will view in the future will be different. It could be maybe virtual viewings as opposed to physical viewings. And the whole doors open viewing scenario will really be a thing of the past. So yeah. I don't know is the easy answer, but watch this space.
Well, certainly it would be we will find a new normal after the lockdown being eased up. So from the audience, we had a question from a letting agent that they have a majority of the type of property that they let is they are HMOs, and they're student HMOs. So in the past, this time of the year, they knew that the students are coming to town, and they were securing the tenancy, and they were getting the deposit and taking the property off the market. Obviously now they don't know what is going to happen. So what is your advice in that situation?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid I don't have a great deal of advice, because of course we don't know when that market's going to come back again. So what I'm hearing from some of the universities is that they might partially reopen in the autumn. So they might do a mixture of online teaching and face-to-face teaching. And it will depend on what courses people are doing. Some of them have to have practical assessments and practical tuition. So some students will come back, but we're going to have the mass onslaught of students coming for the beginning of term as we normally have come September, October. That seems less and less likely to happen now, which means landlords might not be able to fill these tenancies. So you could be struggling to actually find the tenants. So that could happen. The good news is what I was mentioning earlier about council tax, but it's not bringing in income. And that's what we need. And these HMOs are, it's a big income for many people. And it's, as you said, with that particular agent, if you're heavily exposed in one marketplace, i.e. student letting, then, and there's no students, that's going to be a problem. So it will depend on when the students come back, but at the moment, we don't actually know when that's going to be.
Okay. And another question that we had was regarding the loan, which is available to landlords. If we have a landlord who has only one property or two properties in their personal name, and they have been affected by COVID, and on the other hand, they also have properties in their limited company, can they still apply to this loan? So the total number of properties will go higher than 5.
Potentially higher. I think so. And it's not me that's making the decision about the loan. So and it's certainly something I can investigate a bit further. But that landlord, say it's John Blackwood, and there's 2 of my properties in John Blackwood's name and 2 under John Blackwood Limited, then it's linked with your landlord registration. So that's John Blackwood that is the landlord of those properties. and there are only two, because you're asked to give information about all the properties that you own as John Blackwood. So my take on that is, yes, it should be available to you. So I can certainly inquire more about that, just to clarify that and see if there's been any cases. And certainly, if any of you guys have experienced a problem with that, let me know, and I can take that back to the people organising the loan, and I'll find out from them if they've had scenarios like that. So, but it's linked with your landlord registration in the name that you're applying. So that will be able to dictate how many properties you have. So, so I would like to think that you could get it. And if not, then that's something we would be lobbying to have changed if that was the case.
And do you know whether, because as a property investor, one thing that is always in our mind is whether we are being credit checked or not, and how often we have been credit checked. Do you know whether there is a credit check for this type of loan or not? There
is a credit check. It is a loan, so it is governed by the FCA rules. So apparently there has to be a credit check. That was explained to me. But it's the lowest level of credit check. Although I'm aware of one person who's been in touch with me who's found that they've been refused based on the credit check. So still investigating that at the moment as to why that would be the case, if it's a low level check that's actually done there. So hopefully that shouldn't be a significant barrier for landlords. The loan has been organised through the Energy Saving Trust. So it's effectively, it's the same organisation that gives the loans for the energy efficiency loans. So they're used to providing these loans and doing the checks. So it's the same check effectively, or the same level of check that's been looked at. So certainly I'm happy to hear any experience. You can feed it back to me from anybody within the group. If they found that a problem or what experience they've had. It's a learning experience for us all. It's all new. So, and there's so many different types of landlords out there with different stories. So we want to try and help as many people. We want to make sure as many people are helped as possible. So we'll do that.
And if they want to contact you and SAL, the general email of SAL is?
Well, I have to say, I can only help members because obviously we're a membership organisation. We're not publicly funded, so we don't have the resources to help individuals unless they're members. So the first thing is, if you join, of course, we'll help you and we'll look at your case. But I was just giving you the offer there that if people have specific knowledge or experience that they could share with you, and then you in turn can send that. Not that I'll pursue it on their behalf, but it'd be interesting for me to know that, and I can certainly take that intelligence to the people that are making these decisions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Another question from the audience is that if somebody decides to sell a property which is tenanted, what is the notice period at the moment?
Well, if you want to sell a property, then that's 6 months. That's what we're looking at. So, however, it was debated today, and it was at the previous coronavirus bill, or it certainly was mentioned today, is that, some politicians believe that that's wrong, that landlords should not be allowed to sell their properties. So to evict tenants to sell their properties. So they believe that that's wrong. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's more legislation around the corner to actually prevent that happening. Now that would just be a disaster for many. So, but that is being considered. But it's not there at the moment. So you can give notice, but you'll be looking at your 6 months notice.
Okay. Excellent.
And it's discretionary. So it would again be at the discretion of the actual tribunal once you got there. So it's maybe not the best thing to be thinking about at the moment.
So you said moving at the moment is allowed by the government. So basically people can advertise their property for rent and allow people to move. So what is the legislation at the moment around that?
Well, there's two things. There is legislation, the coronavirus legislation, and there's the guidance. And remember, the bigger message from the Scottish Government is we should be staying at home. And we're still in that phase. So that hasn't changed. So the guidance is still clear that we shouldn't be moving home. That's the bottom line. But sometimes you have to, because you're going to be homeless. You don't have anywhere to live. So does that mean you're on the streets? Well, if you've got a property that you could rent to somebody to avoid them being on the streets, then yes, that's an exception that could be made. Or overcrowding. So really what the government's been saying, it should be in exceptional circumstances that we're actually doing any moves. So general viewings, general moves should not be happening at the moment. But as I say, really week by week now, as we get to hopefully the end of a lockdown period or a relaxation beyond the end of the month, we'd be looking at how we can get the housing system, including lettings, moving again. So, and it's all about how we do that safely. So as well, you know, obviously you wouldn't be wanting to do viewings if you've got a tenant in the property. And the tenant wouldn't want that, so they probably wouldn't give you access. And then you would have to think, if the property's empty, what's the risk? There's still a risk to you doing it and meeting members of the public to view, but maybe through appropriate use of PPE, we could be doing this in cleaning and hygiene measures. We could be doing that going forward. So I think there's practical ways we can make it work, but the government's still saying it shouldn't be happening, and that's very much the line that they're still sticking to.
Okay. So you touched upon virtual viewing, and I think a lot of agents are now doing video viewing. So is there any guideline what it should be covered during the virtual viewing, or if somebody wants to secure a property based on a virtual viewing, is it acceptable, or can they later on say they are not happy about that?
Well, they could always say they're not happy, but if the distance selling used to apply to tenancy agreements, so somebody could change their mind after moving into a property. That doesn't apply now, but there is such a thing under consumer legislation, which is called material information, that when the tenant was effectively sold the tenancy, were they aware of all the material information that they should have been, for them to make an informed decision as to whether to continue to go and sign the lease and effectively let the property from you. So if you are doing video viewings, it's perfectly acceptable to do that. Then obviously you'd be open and transparent within that video. So you're videoing it, you're not just videoing the nice bits of the flat or the property. And likewise, you know, if it's unfurnished, then if you've got furniture in it, then you need to be stating clearly the furniture is not included, in case somebody thinks, oh, I thought I was going to get that, you know, because that's what's in the picture, that's what's in the video. So you're trying to be as honest and open and transparent as possible. So you've always got the risk the tenant comes back and saying, actually, your video is misleading, or actually, it never looked like that at all. So, and fair enough, they would have right of recourse through consumer legislation for that. So there's always a danger with these things. Make sure you're doing it correctly, but can you do it? Yes, you can do it. And lots of landlords and agents are saying to me, that's what they're moving to now. They're doing everything virtually, inspections even. And maybe that's going to be the way of the future for some. And that means employing technology. There's a cost with that. But you know what? It maybe would suit everybody, and some agents are saying that's what. So we're doing all virtual viewings, which will cut down in the number of people who turn up to see it, which is less work as well too. I'm old-fashioned. I still like doing a viewing. I still like seeing the tenants. But you know what? They're telling me, well, I still see them because we do a FaceTime interview. You know, the phone is, so you're still getting the chance to speak to them and find out about them and them you. So is that any different to face-to-face? Well, maybe not, actually. And likewise, inspections going forward, virtual inspections where the tenant actually takes the phone round or whatever. So there's lots of real imaginative stuff that both landlords and landlords and letting agents are coming up with to see them through this period, and maybe that will just filter into the normal practice in the future. So,
well, I certainly did not hear about virtual inspection, so that was a nice one.
Yeah, I think it's just, it's ways of doing it. You know, it's, as you mentioned earlier, there will be a new norm at the end of this. And maybe it is us being a bit more savvy with technology and using that. Remember, leases now, because of what we campaigned for with the new PRT, thankfully that can be done electronically. You couldn't do that with old leases. Could you imagine even signing people up in this time? You wouldn't be able to do it because you would need to have the old-fashioned signature on the notices anyway. So, you know, so at least that bit should be easier. So maybe we'll be moving online for a lot of things in the future.
Probably. Kesser, is there any question that I have missed?
Yeah, there was one in particular. Stephen's got an unfortunate position, so I'll read out his question, John, to you. It says, John, I've issued with an eviction order from a case I won prior to the introduction of the COVID bill. I've contacted sheriff officers and been informed that they're not currently working. Is there a time limit on the validity of the notice, or is it going to be extended due to the current COVID crisis?
It will still be valid, but obviously there is the issue about the sheriff officers actually carrying out the work. So you are at liberty to actually wait for them to be able to actually carry that out effectively. So, but it is still valid, so you don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, so it won't apply to the new rules of the 6 months then?
No, because assuming, and I think what you were saying is this all happened prior to COVID legislation coming in. Anything to do with the new legislation was talking about the new notice periods is only if you're giving notice from the beginning of the COVID period, during the emergency period, after it became legislation, so which was the beginning of April.
Okay, right, thank you. Nee's asked me a question as well. He's worried that, you know, with all the grants and the loans and furlough schemes and everything else that's been available to people, are we as landlords potentially going to be targeted in the future for increased taxes? That's what he's worried about.
In what way? Sorry, what you?
He's just worried. You know, will there be a potential raft of new taxes for us as landlords with all the extra benefits and loans and grants that we've been given in the current situation? So,
well, landlords aren't getting grants, and I think we need to be clear about that. And that's something even the politicians are saying to defend the loan to landlords. It's not about giving away money. Actually, landlords have to repay it, so it's not a grant. So it's interest free. It's not costing them anything. They're getting money for nothing in the sense of interest, but they have to pay every penny of it back. So, you know, essentially it's been returned to the government effectively at some period. So that's the advantage of a loan as far as the government's concerned. So you're not going to hand out. So as far as taxes go, you know, we don't know. I guess it's looking in the crystal ball again that, you know, we'll go, and that's largely the UK government. Could they tax landlords more in the future? We are an easy hit when it comes to politicians and governments. Chancellors have a job, and that's raising revenue through taxation. And if they decided to raise tax for landlords, is anybody going to be worried about that? Unless you're a landlord, you wouldn't be worried.
We will be.
So, yeah, we will. But the general public will think, that's fine, just tax them then. So, politically, it makes sense. And that's what we're up against. And I think we have to be realistic, is that we don't win votes for politicians. It's tenants who do. And some of them are in very difficult situations in their homes. We are the provider of those homes. And at the end of the day, politicians will say, well, do you know what? If it goes bad for you in your investment, you've got something to sell at the end of the day. You've still got property that you could realise, whereas other people don't even have that. So that's what you're up against. But I take a bigger view on this, and I say to politicians, actually, we are investors, and we're lucky to be in that position. But we choose to invest in homes for people to live in. Where would those people live if they don't actually live in the houses that we provide? And that's the crux of it. And yes, I could go and put all my money in stocks and shares and get a tax incentive for doing so. Actually, I wouldn't pay the same level of tax that I am now. And that's benefiting shareholders. Whereas actually I take pride in the fact I've invested in homes for people to live in 365 days a year. So that's good for me. And I want to do a good job, and actually quite like doing it. And I take pride in doing it well. And I hope others do too. But is there a recognition for that? I'm afraid there isn't. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that's really powerful. Yeah, I think you echo what we all think as landlords as well. Right, I'll jump back to you. So most of the other questions that were there have already been answered.
There is one more question, is that regarding company-led. So if a company is renting a property from you, and can they be evicted previous, like before, or things has changed?
Yes, they're not governed by any of the bits of legislation I've been talking about today. So you can't make a company homeless. So they won't have the protection of a private residential tenancy. So we're only talking about, all this legislation I've been talking about is about if you rent to an individual as their home. So that's a private residential tenancy if it was created after December 2017, 1st of December. So a company, it's a commercial agreement.
Okay, excellent. Myself and Kessler, we are both members of SAL, and we have seen the benefit. Do you want to close the meeting to say what are the benefits of being a member of SAL? If anyone, I think majority of people here, they are members, but if you like to tell people what are the benefits of being a member to people.
Yeah, I think, well, I wouldn't bore you with it because it is very much a sales pitch. So, and I appreciate not everybody likes that. But, you know, everything, we've been going for about 20 years now. And as I say, as a landlord, speaking to you as a landlord, the reason why we created SAL was because we wanted a lobby for landlords, people who knew the industry, who could share experience with each other. So we could do things like this and say, well, this is what's worked for me as a landlord. It might work for you. And then relate it to implementing new pieces of legislation and giving you good practice tools. Now, all of that peer support is what we can do as SAL. And the lobbying is very much an add-on to that. So we can say, well, this is what we experience. This is what we have as a difficulty within our businesses. And we need to change that. And the law needs to change. So over the years, we've been able to be quite successful and get lots of bits of legislation changed, which would have gone dramatically against us had we not have done that lobbying. Now, that's largely my job to represent members. Every private landlord benefits from that, not just members, because it's the whole of the landlord community. But we can only do that with your support. So that's why we need your membership money. Politicians, governments don't give us money to do the job we are doing. We rely on you. So we hope, A, you see the benefit through the lobbying, the campaigning, and the membership support that we give. So we'll get back to members' meetings, even virtually, where we can share this experience with each other in regional areas, which we've been doing for a long time. We do training through Landlord Accreditation Scotland, so you can upskill, and that's good too, because we want to have a good, vibrant, private rented sector, and sharing tips with each other as well too. I think that's really important. So, you know, and as I say, had we not have done our lobbying, we could have been in a position where you couldn't sell your properties, you wouldn't be able to reclaim anything on rent arrears. These were realities that we were fighting against, and that would have been a disaster for our sector. So we need you to get on board. It's £95 a year, tax deductible. And lots of people, maybe you as members, can chip in and hopefully back me up, saying that some members say it's the best 95 quid I've ever spent.
Well, I certainly can vouch for that. So it's one of the best £95 that we have spent. So the number of questions that we have it has been answered. It just basic, especially now, I was very surprised to see that we call, and within an hour somebody calls us back, an expert calls us back and answer our question, which we didn't know where to look, or we would have been lost in a lot of policies that are being published every day.
And that's a big part of our advice team. You know, people are doing what I've been doing tonight, day in, day out. That's their jobs within SAL. So you've got unlimited access to advice on landlord and tenancy issues. So, you know, that's there at the end of a phone. We as landlords, we work individually. We feel very isolated. Sometimes we think we're the only one that's got the problem. It's just affecting us. And sometimes just to phone us and for us to say, yeah, we know that, and actually others are experiencing the same thing, and actually this is how you can deal with it. That's really reassuring, and we can give you the tools to be able to hopefully solve a lot of these problems. And as I say, that helps us campaign too, because we know when it's going wrong and where it's going wrong, and hopefully how to fix it. And so that's how we get things done. And the online tools that we have, we've got fact sheets and all the subjects we've discussed tonight. So you would have access to that members area of the website, and you just download them at your leisure. The private residential tenancy we mentioned earlier, there's a model online, so it's free for everybody to use through the Scottish Government, but there's a section for additional terms. And we actually have devised a whole load of additional terms, which you could just cut and paste and put into your lease. Again, that's only available to members. Makes your lease longer, but you know what? I don't care as long as it does the job. So there might be additional clauses we would be saying to you, you know what, you maybe need to think about putting that in, because we know other landlords that found they've needed that at some point. Okay. So there's a good tip and a good reason to join.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot of thank you coming through the chat box. So if I ask people to take a screenshot of this meeting, and if you post it on your personal Facebook page or LinkedIn page, whatever you're using, and say a thank you to the wide audience out there, to John for being our guest speaker tonight, I think we highly appreciate it, because then it will support SAL, which will support us as a landlord again.
Thank you. And I see a few people are saying Caroline and Gail in the advice line have been fantastic. So I'll feed that back to them. So they'll really appreciate that too. So thanks for saying that.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, John. Is there anything that I haven't covered, Kesser?
No, I think that's it. Obviously, we put information through. There'll be a new e-news coming out very soon about everything that happened in Parliament today. But thankfully, we've been able to get rid of the horrors and what we could have had through the amendments to the legislation. But we just need to keep fighting away and supporting each other as landlords. I think that's really, really important. And
also supporting tenant at the same time. It's sometimes that it's being missed. That so what SAL is doing is, as you mentioned, is that we are, majority of people on this call, they are proud to be landlords, to provide home to people. So
and we want to provide the best homes. You know, that's very much our mantra as SAL, not just be a landlord, but let's provide the best homes we possibly can. Let's look after our tenants. They are our customers. And in every business, you need to look after your customers. And we should be doing that with our tenants. So making sure the repairs are done, the properties are well maintained, well managed. I take pride in the fact that in my properties that I own myself, I have long-term tenants. I've got good relationships with those tenants. I hope they'll be there for many more years to come. But that took a lot to build up that relationship. But see, when you do it, it's a really good feeling, and it's well worth investing in. So that's what I want to see every landlord doing. And yes, there's always horror stories. Things always happen and people don't pay rent. Sometimes we need to evict, and sadly, many of us have come across that. And that's a horrible situation to be in. But if it was like that for most of us most of the time, none of us would do this, let's be honest. So we have to put it into perspective and think that most tenants do pay rent, do look after the properties, and have good relationships with us as landlords. And that's what we need to invest in for the future. We are investors as landlords. I think sometimes we forget that, but we're cautious investors. That's why we invest in bricks and mortar, because we want to be safe. We want to feel secure. But think about it as a business proposition. you're handing over one of your most valuable assets to a complete and utter stranger. You're giving them the keys and saying, will you look after that for me? And will you pay me out every month in return for it? The fact that this works is pretty amazing when you think about it. So let's take pride in when it does work and how well it can work for us. And happy investing, and keep going there, guys. And I hope it works out well for you.
Thank you so much for your time. On behalf of myself and Kessler, it has been a great session, so thank you so much. And
if people want information about SAL, I think they can give you their email address and you can pass it on if you give consent. So however you want to work that out.
Yes.
Yeah, we're happy to send you information about all the benefits, and the email will explain it much better than I have done.
And we'll contact everybody at the end. Well, we'll email everybody and we'll get consent, and then they can, you can get in touch with them from there, or SAL can.
That's fine. Thank you. If you want that, that's super. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
That's great. And thanks bye from the cats as well too. You've seen them both now. So that's it. So they're well made up. I don't think there's been a single Zoom call that they haven't actually Zoom bombed. So there we go. So.
Well, it's good to see your landlords. So the two cats that.
Exactly. That's it too. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.